terrorism, economic warfare, politic bin, clandestine operations. Unredacted with Rachel Marsden. Lifting the black ink to reveal information and intelligence around global events. And now, here is your host, Rachel Marsden.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm coming to you live from the EU SSR, the European Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, from behind the curtain of censorship. Yes, this show was rebooted just this week, starting March 14th, when my other show, which aired on a platform currently banned within the European Union, ceased to exist for the time being until such time as the conflict in Ukraine, at the very least, ends. We'll see what happens. So in the meantime, thankfully, the curtain of censorship of the USSR is apparently it's outsourced and made in China or Cambodia or Vietnam. Like everything else, probably was bought on Wish, which means that it has some flaws that that allow for me to still broadcast in one way or another. So as a result, here I am on a completely independent platform. And now's as good a time as any, because a lot of you have been messaging me, contacting me and asking me what is up with everything going on in the world today. So there's a lot to talk about. Now, some of you have also asked why the title Unredacted and why the tagline Lifting the Black Ink to Reveal the Covert Information and Intelligence Around Global Events. Well, when I created this show first time around about 7 years ago, and it aired for about 2 years in that period, once a week. The whole idea was to be able to get the ground truth about what's happening in the world by talking to current and former frontline operators. So people who have an attachment with what's going on the ground, who have either served on the ground themselves in some capacity, either as analysts, officers, ambassadors, diplomats, ministers, or frontline personnel of any kind, really, political, economic, military, intelligence. And to get as close as we possibly can by hearing from personnel on all sides of a particular debate to the ground truth. Something we don't get right now under the censorship that we're seeing all kinds of places, all imposed under the guise of protecting people from quote unquote disinformation, propaganda, or misinformation. Instead, what we're seeing is people are limited to propaganda that is favored by whatever entity imposes the censorship. So in other words, it's their way of controlling the narrative by banning access to other narratives. And it's really unfortunate because nobody really holds the truth when it comes to the fog of war. Either the war on COVID, the war on terrorism, or as we're seeing now, the war in Ukraine. And it's important to hear from all sides, all perspectives. Because as we're seeing right now, even with the situation in Ukraine, you get such varying just information just when it comes to basic data, like the number of casualties or deaths or who's responsible for a missile strike or the sources of weapons, the reality on the ground. And in order to assess the credibility of the information that we're presented by any side in a conflict, any actor in a conflict, it's important to be able to have access to everything out there and to make a decision for yourself and to see what checks out, to be able to test that information. Not everybody has the time to do that. That's understandable. But to flat out just force feed people information by telling them this is everything you're able to digest in terms of data and intelligence and information. And for the rest, we're blocking your access to the point where to be able to access some of the shows that I've hosted in the past, you now need a VPN. You have to download some software that essentially allows you to spoof your location as being somewhere you aren't. In other words, you have to pretend you're in Vietnam or something in order to be able to access some of my former shows from within the European Union during this period. And it's unfortunate because some of those shows feature guests that I have on this platform, and they, like myself, are basically giving you the same analysis as you would get on my other program that is now under censorship as a result of decisions made at the European Union level and by, might I add, the big tech companies, which are the handmaidens of government censorship. Kudos to Elon Musk, who was asked to provide satellite internet support through his new satellite system, Starlink, to Ukraine. And then when he was asked by government, he wouldn't name, not Ukraine, to censor certain news platforms, including news platforms hosted by the Russian Federation. He basically told them, in his own words, only at gunpoint. And he said, sorry to be a free speech absolutist. I don't know why they think they're doing people any favors. They're just looking to control the narrative at this point and to have people only think and react and promote the limited information that they've been given. And it was the same kind of thing with COVID. We saw that, and I don't think that's anywhere near over either, but seem to be gearing up for another round of COVID-related hysteria. And interesting because here in France, they came up with contradicting information. The Moderna president or Moderna CEO, vaccine maker, said today that he believes only immunocompromised and elderly people would need a 4th dose of the vaccine. Here in France, it's been 3 doses. But today, yesterday, the Prime Minister of France authorized a 4th dose to be given to people over the age of 80. And at the same time, the Pfizer CEO, Boula, his name is, last name, he said that there is going to be a necessity for a fourth dose. So there's a contradiction between the advice and the posture of the Moderna CEO versus that of the Pfizer CEO. And it's going to be interesting to see how that reconciles between now and the next flu season, I guess, when everybody starts promoting flu shots. By the way, don't really remember a big flu shot campaign last year. That was kind of interesting. But anyway, if you get into these topics on various platforms, including YouTube and some of the platforms on which this show, Unredacted, airs, you're wading into hot water or lukewarm water because you don't really know where they define the line as being for misinformation, just for strictly having the discussion, for asking questions. So people are self-censoring as a result. They're afraid to ask the questions. And there are other platforms that are popping up, Odyssey and Rumble, for example, that allow for those discussions to take place. And I know there's been a lot of pressure on the founder of Odyssey video platform for hosting voices that are censored elsewhere as a result of wrong speak. So here we are, and we are going to address all of the important issues going on in the world right now. Next up, we're going to have our guest joining us, hopefully in the next 2-3 minutes. He's scheduled to be on in the next 2-3 minutes. We're fortunate to have Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of the People's Party of Canada. He's been fighting for free speech, for personal freedom and choice with respect to medical decisions and vaccination during the COVID pandemic. And he has been on the ground, front and center in Canada, and all of the commotion that's been going on with respect to the Freedom Convoy. Remember the truckers, some of whom had their accounts blocked, who are accused of being funded through foreign sources. We now know, even according to a Canadian Broadcast Corporation admission, that that is not true, even though Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, wrote an op-ed for the Globe and Mail flat out saying that it is sedition what the truckers were doing in defense of freedom and freedom of choice, freedom of medical choice, freedom of speech, anti-mandate, anti-restriction. He called it sedition, and he also accused them of being foreign funded, and now we know that's not true. So we're going to talk to Maxime Bernier, who's Minister of Industry and Foreign Affairs of Canada, about that. We're also going to talk to him about Ukraine, Canada's position with respect to Ukraine. And don't forget, it came out in the Ottawa Citizen last November, really prestigious newspaper in Canada, that Canada, the Canadian Ministry of Defense, was involved in training neo-Nazis to act as proxy fighters on behalf of the West against Russia in Ukraine. So we're going to talk about that as well, and we'll find out how that came to be. So here he is. We're lucky to have Maxime Bernier with us. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me? I'm very pleased to be with you.
We can't quite hear him, so I'm going to see.
I
think, is that better? No.
Yeah, my mic is working.
Audio. So I'm going to see if maybe I can fix it.
Is it better like that?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So I'm in Montreal.
That's better.
Okay, good.
All right, that's great. I don't know if I did anything different that fixed it, but it works. All right, Maxime Bernier, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. I just told the audience right before you came on that you're former Minister of Industry of Canada, or Foreign Affairs of Canada, and you're currently the leader of the People's Party of Canada. You've been on the ground engaged with respect to the fight for freedom against mandates in context of the COVID pandemic. And you're front and center with the Freedom Convoy, and you also have a very interesting position with respect to Canada's role in Ukraine and position with respect to what's going on right now between NATO and Russia via Ukraine. So welcome to the show. I know I've had you on my French show before, and this is the first time I've had a chance to speak to you in English. It's a pleasure, as always.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you, Rachel.
Thank you. So actually, there's three things I want to talk about. Let's start with Ukraine, since that is the big story right now, front and center. Now, I'm really curious as to how Canada ended up being this involved in this conflict, starting way back when. I know 2004, 2005, when I was living in Toronto, I was in contact with political consultants who were dealing on an international level. And they came to me and said, we have a client who's running for president of Ukraine. Would you like to be involved? And I thought, why come to Canada? Why come to people in Canada? Why is Canada even involved in Ukraine? Now, there must be a whole history here. Do you have any insight into why Canada is so knee deep in this?
Yes, first, I must say, Rachel, that I condemn the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And, that's what is happening right now. It's a human tragedy. And our country now is part of that by doing some sanctions and sending arms and ammunition to the Ukraine army. We must say that in Canada, we have a huge community of Canadian from Ukraine origin, about 1.5, 1.6 million people. So that's why for politicians, they have a strong position. All these establishment politicians in Canada, the leader of the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Conservative Party of Canada, the Green Party, the NDP, they all have a position for Canada to be engaged in that war, doing a little bit more. And we are the only national political party that is against Canada being involved in that. And so, because we look at the history, Rachel, and I remember that in 1962, John F. Kennedy didn't want to have a Soviet base in Cuba, didn't want to have missiles in Cuba, and because Cuba is at his doors. So, and what we did after the Cold War in the 1990s, we, the West, what we did, we encouraged and we did a huge expansion of NATO by having new members coming from Eastern Europe. And now the discussion in the 1990s was about the expansion of NATO. And we did that. And now NATO is at the doors of Russia. And we push a little bit Ukraine to ask to be part of NATO, to ask to be part of the EU, and to be part of the West. But I believe, and our party believe, that Ukraine must be neutral, and we must try to find a compromise with Russia. Russia and Ukraine are in war right now. It's a tragedy, and we need to find a diplomatic solution. And that's the position of our political party, the People's Party. What we want the federal government and the Canadian government to do everything and work with our allies and NATO partners to try to find a diplomatic solution by proposing a neutral Ukraine. And I think that would be a good start to end that conflict. So that's the position of our party. And we are the only national party, like I said, that has a position like that. We are for peace and prosperity.
Yeah, it came out in the Ottawa Citizen last November that Canada, the government, and the Ministry of Defense was involved in training neo-Nazi fighters on the border with Russia inside Ukraine in those two regions, namely that are now considered breakaway regions, and whose independence was recognized by Russia. and previously were considered given special recognition within Ukraine by the president of Ukraine. Now, why was Canada involved in the training of neo-Nazi fighters against Russian interests in Ukraine? How did we ever get into, as a Canadian citizen, I'm curious, how did we ever get into that mess?
Yeah, I have a lot of difficulties also to answer that question. There's a lot of conflicts around the world, in Africa and other countries, and we are not part of that. But I believe, if you look at the Western media, the mainstream media in America and Canada, if you have a position that is a little bit different than supporting Ukraine, you are a pro-Russia and pro-Putin. So that's very popular to be pro-Ukraine. And I can understand, Russia did that, started that war, an invasion of Ukraine, and that's against what we believe in Western countries. And, Ukraine must be sovereign. But that being said, we are in a war right now, and we must try to find a solution to that. And we are not. We must stop to escalate that conflict with more and more draconian restrictions and measures on Russia. That's not the solution. The solution would be to just stop to escalate that conflict and try to have a discussion. The positive fact of all that, there's some discussion with Ukraine and Russia, and I hope that it will end well for everybody, because we don't want that conflict to escalate a lot more. We must understand that Russia has a nuclear arm, so they can use it. I believe they want, and I hope so. But we must take Putin seriously in the West and try to have a discussion with him and Ukraine. And I think that must be the role of our country, not to send ammunitions and training troops in Ukraine. I'm against that invasion, like I said, and I'm not supporting a dictator like Putin, but I want that to end, because the consequences of that are huge economically, for everybody, for us in Western countries, for Russian people, for you can see the inflation now. And we know that Ukraine is a big exporter of grain, and so that will have an impact on food for everybody on this planet. So we must look at the impact of all these restrictions imposed on Russia, and try to solve that by using diplomacy. But that's not the case. So answering your question, why our country is so engaged in that, I don't know. I know that the Ukraine community in Canada are asking for that, and I can understand. They have family over there, and I can understand that. But we must look at the big picture, and we are not.
Right. And as far as the big picture goes, I know that the Russian side is citing their justification for having gone into Ukraine with their military operation as being to get rid of the weapons that have been built up, provided by NATO countries, and to denazify Ukraine, in the sense that we do know for a fact that they have that foreign countries, including Canada, including the United States, have been training these neo-Nazis as proxy fighters, as sort of Ukraine rebels, in the sense that we had the Syrian rebels that were fought, that were trained by the West through operations with the CIA, Pentagon, to ultimately overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria. That was a failure. We had the Libyan rebels that were supposed to overthrow Gaddafi. That was a success, I guess, in that sense. We've seen this blueprint occur over and over and over, and we kind of now see the same kind of thing happening in Ukraine. And Russia's justification for going in is that. Do you consider that a not a credible justification, or do you think that from the Russian perspective, they do have cause for concern that justifies the actions that they've taken so far?
But there's never a good justification to go to war. And but historically, like I said, the U.S. didn't tolerate missiles in Cuba, and didn't tolerate that in 1962. So I can understand why Putin didn't want to have a NATO base in Ukraine. We did the same thing in the West in 1962. So that being said, I believe that that was not a reason for him to invade a country, invade Ukraine. But that's a fact now. So we need to deal with it and try to find a solution that will save lives. And I hope that Canada can put more pressure to find that solution.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate. I agree with you with respect to Canada's positioning with respect to this conflict. And I just personally think it's unfortunate that Canada has lost that credible mediator role in the world that it used to have. It was seen as an honest broker. Now it seems like wherever the United States goes, we go too. I think that we could have played a much more important role in a conflict like this if we would have had more of a neutral positioning. Is that even feasible though? Because there are some experts who say Canada cannot afford to have a neutral positioning because it's too associated with the United States. Can we have a more independent foreign policy from the United States, do you think?
I believe so. And we had one under the Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. We decided not to go in war against Iraq. We said no to that, and we didn't go there. But U.S. Was there with other allies, but we were not there. So I believe that to an extent we can have an independent foreign policy in Canada, and the Chrétien government did it. So I believe that you can do it with Ukraine also.
Is there a price to pay for that, though? Well, I know that the European Union has seen that there is a price to pay economically for going against the will of the United States. We saw that with Nord Stream 2 and Europe's interest for importing Russian gas through Germany through the Nord Stream 2 project. And long before this conflict in Ukraine came along, the Americans sanctioned the heck out of that pipeline simply because they did not want to see a rapprochement economically or otherwise between the European Union and Russia, because it would strengthen the two entities. So, like I said, there's always pressure coming from the United States, and they have the ability, the systemic ability, with the domination they have economically, politically in the world, especially with the Western sphere, the influence that they have, to be able to pressure an entity. Could Canada feasibly, do you think, withstand that pressure? You mentioned Iraq and Jean Chrétien's position with respect to the war in Iraq. There was a lot of pressure on Canada, but somehow it was able to come out of that okay. Do you think today would be the same case?
Yeah, I believe that we can, but for sure we will have a lot of pressure from the US if we want to have a different position. I agree with you on that. But don't forget, Canada is one of the biggest trade partners of the US. We have a free trade agreement with them since a long time. And we are exporting gas and oil to the US. So we are a big partner with the US also. So I believe that you can have a frank discussion like Chrétien had at that time, and having a discussion not only with the American, but with our NATO allies, and telling them, that expansion that we started in the 1990s, maybe we went too far. And so I'm not the only one who's saying that. I know some experts are saying that also. That was not a good decision to promote that expansion up to the borders of Russia. And now we have a situation that we must try to deal with it as soon as possible to end that war, and not putting more sanction and pressure on Russia and everybody there.
Yeah, and the neutrality with respect to the conflict between NATO interests and Russian interests within Ukraine, that's something that AMLO, Obrador, the president of Mexico, is also back. And he seems to be taking a more neutral stance with respect to that particular conflict. And I don't really I see him also doing that with Latin America. He's trying to position himself as more of an honest broker between the United States interests and certain unaligned interests within Latin America. And it seems to be a wise positioning. I don't know if Canada could manage, as you say, I mean, you think it could, and given your background and experience within the foreign policy establishment, I think that's optimistic. I think it'd be great if we could, but we also have the element of, you know, the civil servants who serve within the foreign establishment community in Canada. What role do they play? As in the US, I guess they're colloquially referred to as the deep state. Does Canada have a deep state?
Yeah. It's everywhere. You know, a deep state is the civil servants and the deputy minister working with the minister. I used to say, you're a minister for a couple of years, and after that, if the civil servants are the same, they will push the policies that they want to. You need to have a strong politician to say, no, it's not what I want to do as a politician, elected politician. But you have the diplomacy, and I'll give you an example about the position our position Canada concerning Israel. When I was foreign affairs minister, we wanted to be more pro-Israel, and at that time, and the civil servant in foreign affairs didn't agree with that. We had to push that and to be sure that we'll have the votes in the UN more in favor of Israel than being neutral. That was the position of the Harper government at that time. But yeah, you have to build your case, and you have to convince Canadians and sometimes your own civil servants on your position. And they have to execute. I know that it's not popular speaking like I'm speaking right now in Canada, but I believe that's the best thing. We will have, I believe, if we are going in that direction, we may have peace and prosperity earlier than later.
It would be great if Canada could actually approach things on a case-by-case basis and not strictly just we support Israel all the time and we oppose whatever conflict they're having, or the other party to their conflict all the time, or we support Ukraine or whatever entity is against Russia all the time. Sometimes Russia's right. Sometimes Israel's wrong, right? But can we just take things on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, but what I was telling you, it was the position of the Harper government at that time, right. And I was part of that government. Right. So the PPC, our political party, my party, the People's Party, have a position that is, yes, pro-democracy, pro-Israel, but we are looking at the, at the facts depending of the situation, and we are able to have a different position if we have to. But at that time, it was 100%, you're right, pro-Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I think your ad hoc approach is refreshing because you often see the impact of lobbyist movements on Canadian politics, on all politics, frankly. And sometimes you wonder kind of what are the interests behind a government taking a certain position. And I think an honest approach, ad hoc approach, an issue by issue approach is really refreshing because you don't see that much. Now, just switching to it. Yeah.
If I may add on that, and sometime in Canada, our foreign policies are not are not made for the interests of our country, but for the interests of a political party winning some seats in some region. So sometimes some politicians are drafting our foreign policies in line with the wish of some Canadians instead of looking at the big portrait, the big picture. So I believe that we must do that. I'm telling you, the position that we have at the PPC, I believe that I won't have a lot of support in Western Canada, where there's a lot of a huge population of Canadians coming from Ukraine. But I believe it's in the best interest of our country, and it's the best thing to do to promote peace and prosperity not only in Canada, but everywhere.
Well, I think that's a sensible position. I don't know if the position that NATO has taken or other Western nations have taken have honestly served the Ukrainian people given the situation they're in today. So that's the other side of the argument that I guess one could bring up. It's, I mean, touching on something related, I know that there's a lot of censorship, and I'm sure you're aware there's a lot of censorship going on around this issue here in the European Union. Certain platforms, certain independent programs that were aired on Russian related or linked platforms are censored, unavailable within the EU or online generally, even through VPNs in some cases. I know YouTube took all the shows and blocked them even through VPNs, even if you geolocate yourself to Vietnam. So there's an effort to control the narrative. But there's a larger censorship issue at play too. It didn't start with this. It started long before this. We've seen cancel culture in the context of the Me Too movement in the United States and more largely in North America. And particularly with respect to the COVID pandemic, there was a real effort to control the narrative within Western countries in particular, to exclude any heterodox views that might call into question certain practices that were put in place, like the mandates, restrictions, curfews, things like that. Do you have a reaction to that and what you've noticed in Canada?
Yeah, I have personally, and the People's Party, we have a YouTube channel, and actually, I got the two strike because I did an interview with a professor from University of Toronto, an ethic professor, discussing about COVID-19 and the impact on our society. And it's real. The censorship is real on YouTube, and the big tech are playing with the same game of these governments, and so they try to promote the one narrative, and yes, that cancel culture is everywhere. And I was reading La Presse today, and a serious piece about a hockey player from Russian origin, and they're saying, can he play in the national hockey or not, or he must not play there? He must not have the right to play. It's we must judge people that what they're doing, not because that person is coming from Russia, that must be very bad. It's the cancel culture that is everywhere right now, and that's a big danger for our society. And you see that everywhere. And if you don't speak like the government, or you're not in line with the mainstream media, you have a risk. You have a risk to be canceled, and that happened to me on YouTube. And I'm not on YouTube for the next 2 weeks, and I'll be back after that. But I believe that the third one will be the last one, and so it's. But all that started when you have a big corporation, big tech corporation, that decided to cancel the former president of the United States on Twitter. He was not a terrorist, maybe you like him or you don't like him, but that started there. When as a society you don't do anything about that, and Trump was not a terrorist, and maybe he said something that you don't like, you just have not to read his Twitter account, that's it. But when you cancel the former president of the United States, they can cancel Maxime Bernier tomorrow, and it's you're not in a democracy anymore.
Yeah, I remember when they canceled Alex Jones, who hosts a show on a site called Prison Planet. But I remember when I can't remember if it was his, I think it was his YouTube channel was canceled, and he was pulled off a bunch of social media. And I remember the reaction of some people was, well, he just went too far. And I had to stop and think about that. And I thought, okay, well, what is too far? And he chooses where that line is. And we saw with COVID that it was completely arbitrary. It's just whatever they decide, wherever they decide on any given day could result in you losing your platform. And we all were sold on this idea that social media was the great liberator and that it would democratize speech. And And now we see it's essentially a Trojan horse.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. The internet and social media, that was
Mhm.
supposed to be the place to debate, to have conversation and be able to discuss any issues, but that's not the case anymore. And that can be worse in the near future.
Yeah, and in terms of losing platforms, there's another issue with respect to that. We can talk about the Freedom Convoy. That's kind of dropped out of the news because now instead of hating truckers and treating truckers as fascists, they're a real fascist to deal with. But we can the Azov Battalion fighting in Ukraine, but we can still buy their stuff on Amazon. You can buy an Azov Battalion T-shirt on Amazon, and those are real neo-Nazis. But the so-called fascists, truckers in Canada, if you were to buy a T-shirt to support them, you could end up on a bank blacklist in Canada with your account blocked. Um, how is all that turned out? Is there a resolution to it? I do know that the CBC this was shocking to me as a journalist who has avoided Canadian media deliberately, except for the very beginning of my career for this reason. But I was shocked to see the CBC actually admit that there was no foreign funding of the trucker movement, especially when Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, flat out wrote an op-ed in the Globe and Mail saying, not only is this sedition by the truckers, they want to overthrow the government, but they're also foreign funded, and that has to stop. So turns out that wasn't correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the media, they try to discredit everybody that were there, telling people that they were a bunch of racists, and the prime minister did the same thing. I was there 3 weekends, and I can tell you that was family, and people were happy to be there because they knew that all that will end soon, and that's the case actually. In Canada, the only restriction now it's Justin Trudeau that won't allow Canadian who doesn't have a vaccine passport to travel inside the country and outside the country by plane. So that's crazy like that in our country. But that being said, the worst of all that when the prime minister decided to use the Emergencies Act and use the powers in that act to be able to freeze a bank account, and they did it. And that was a big shock for everybody because I was a banker before being in politics. I was a VP of a bank, and it's based on confidence. It's based people must trust the banking industry, and doing that was the beginning of something. The government will freeze your account because you decided to donate $20 to the truckers freedom convoy without asking the court before, without a court order, just like that. And the bank decided, okay, we'll do it. I believe that was too much, and I'm not the only one. And so the trust toward the governments and the banking system is not the same that it was before that, and that may have an impact in the near future. But that being said, if the government is able to do that, usually that was the extreme alternative to use to froze bank account, and you did it in the past to against terrorists or
Right.
criminals, and you had to
Mhm.
go before the court before being able to do that. And now they were able to do it, but at least the good news on all that, all these accounts are not frozen anymore, and so that's a good news. But they did it. That's the bad news.
Yeah, and there's other bad news, and that is that Canadians still can't leave the country by plane. Or I don't know, I don't even think they can cross the border because how you have to take a boat somewhere, I guess. Or I don't even know because you can't get into the United States without being vaccinated either. So,
Yeah.
and what's even more troubling, I don't think this fight is over anywhere near over because we have the World Health Organization that is developing a framework for harmonization and coordination of all the different vaccine passports for travel purposes all around the world, so that this seemed like it wouldn't be doing that if this wasn't something they thought would persist. So,
Yeah, you have,
what's the exit plan? Like, where's the exit ramp for Canadians who aren't vaccinated, who and
but
we see that this
yeah,
pandemic has died down. So I mean, where does it end
yeah,
for them?
the exit plan, for me, I decided to sue the federal government
Mhm.
because it is my constitutional rights to be able to travel across this country and outside the country, and I cannot because I decided not to have the two shots, and I don't have the vaccine passport. But that being said, and the hearing of my case will be in September. I hope before that time I'll be able to travel. And if I'm able to travel and these draconian measures are not enforced anymore, that case will be heard by the judge. A judge said yes, it's too important. So at least we will have a decision, and I believe that the decision will be in our favor because it's clearly against the Charter of Rights in Canada. So I hope I'll be able to travel before that. But I'm a prisoner in my own country right now.
And you're one of many at this
Oh yeah,
point,
I'm not
too.
alone. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I guess the case that you're referring to is being handled through the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Is that right?
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
My lawyer is working with the Justice Center,
Mhm.
Samuel Bachan. Yeah, and
I know
I'm not,
him.
I- I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm not the only one. I think there's about maybe 20 or 25 cases like that, and the judge
Mhm.
decided to put all these cases together, and I think that was a good idea. So the hearing will be in September, early September.
Yeah. With the few minutes we have left, is there anything that you want to address or talk about? What's forefront in your mind at this point? Anything that you have on the front burner?
Yeah, but what I believe, not only for Canadians, but also for Americans and people in Europe, they must understand that we cannot take for granted our freedoms anymore
Yeah.
in all our democratic countries, and we must fight. That's what we are doing, and we, the People's Party here in Canada, we funded that party on four principles: individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness, and we will always fight for that. But people must be able to be active, and we will win if we have more people that are active, that are protesting when the time is coming, and writing to their elected representative and telling him or her that you don't like what that person is doing, because I believe that our democracy are in danger right now. So we you can count on us, and I believe that we must do that together. Not only Canadians, but people in other countries also that want to be able to live without fear and without any measures that the government will do against you and against your rights and freedoms.
Did you ever think that we'd see the day where the position that you just articulated would be seen as markedly different from that of the two main political parties? Because I find that it's shocking that we've gone that far down the, I guess, the direction of
Yeah,
dystopia that quickly.
yeah. No, I'm disappointed. We didn't have any opposition the last 2 years on the COVID measures. The
Mm.
official opposition in Ottawa and also the official opposition in every province in this country were on the side of the government. So we didn't have an opposition, and that's scary when you don't have an opposition that is supposed to play a role and to oppose and to explain another policy. We were the only one, and that's why I said, we are the real opposition in Canada. We are not the official opposition, but we are the real one. And but the you know our movement is growing and step by step. So we'll see what will happen. But yeah, it's scary that all these politicians that were elected during COVID-19 think that everything was okay. doing these restrictions was normal to do that, and that was not normal.
Yeah, and what's even scarier to me is that they were able to convince a wide swath of Canadian public to go along with it, that it was in their best interest. And they are convinced of that. And it happened here too in France. I mean, people are scared.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, they did spend a lot of money in advertising. I call that propaganda. You know, put all that together, fear, propaganda, and all the money that they spend, and also censorship. You have everything to be successful, and they were. Actually, I remember when the first curfew started in Montreal a year and a half ago. When the government did that, he had the support of 65% of the population. So yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, I remember when the curfew started here too, about that time in January, I guess, of last year. And it's when I caught COVID without knowing it initially, because I had to get everything. I was worn down because I had to get everything done before 5 p.m., before everything closed, before we had to be home by 6 p.m. And I think it's what weakened my defenses enough that I got COVID. So thank you, curfew, that served the exact opposite purpose from what it was intended. So yeah, I mean, I don't know where we're going with all of this, but I really appreciate you explaining to us where you think we might be headed and how, your perspective is on all of this with respect to Ukraine, everything from Ukraine to the pro-freedom movement that seems to be gaining steam the more they tighten the screws. And I don't think we're done with that yet. And general censorship observations. Thank you so much, Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Industry of Canada. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm very pleased that I had that opportunity. So see you another time.
Always a pleasure. You bet. Take care.
Bye.
All right. So that was a fascinating conversation. And I just want to spend the next couple of minutes letting you guys know what's up in the next few days. So as I promised you, we would have 3 shows a week, and I'm keeping that promise. So not tomorrow, what are we? We're Tuesday today. So Thursday, March 17th, we're going to have Scott Eulinger. Scott Eulinger is former CIA operations officer and station chief, who was based in the former Soviet Union Baltic states and also served in Eastern Europe. So he's going to come on and talk about Ukraine because he speaks fluent Russian. He served in that part of the world. He's very acutely aware of the different aspects of the influence tug of war between East and West within that region. He also might be able to shed a little bit of light on covert activities, if he doesn't get himself in trouble for doing so. Covert activities in that part of the world, some of which may have led us or played a role in leading us to the situation that we observe today with respect to the conflict in Ukraine. Anyway, wealth of knowledge, and Scott Eulinger will be on Thursday, former CIA station chief and operations officer. And the idea on this program, I just want you to know, the reason why I have people from all sides of the political spectrum, and I'm not just bringing people on who agree with me necessarily or who disagree with me necessarily, is because I want to be able to figure out for myself what the ground truth is. And you need to hear all sides of the story in order to approximate that. We don't censor here, unlike some governments and some platforms. Hey, if they censor us for talking to all sides on the various digital platforms, what do you do? That's really the only goal, is to try to approximate ground truth and to talk to everybody and to get every perspective. So We're going to get a former CIA officer's perspective on the next show on Ukraine. In the meantime, what else has been going on? It looks like the latest news, I've just been monitoring the stream, the news feed while the show has been airing. And I'm doing a million things at once. If you guys could only see what's in front of me, I've got my setup, I've got the chat from people who might have questions as we're interacting with the guests. I can throw a question up or a comment up on the screen. I'm also monitoring various connection levels and dealing with different feeds. Just kind of juggling chainsaws. That's what's going on that you guys can't see. So hopefully it's not too obvious because it's not supposed to be. So newsfeed wise, what's been happening? It looks like Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has now acknowledged, probably for about the third time now, I've heard him make this type of a statement, that joining NATO is a lost cause. The fact that he's coming to that realization, or has come to that realization, if he indeed has, and he's not using it as just a ploy of some kind. I mean, it could be a form of, I don't know, lobbying or something, or an appeal to something or someone. But if you take that at face value, I think it paves the way for enshrined neutrality of Ukraine and security guarantees from all parties for Ukraine, which would effectively end this conflict. I also read today elsewhere from a censored source, but with credible sources, in other words, government sources whose names were put to their statements, that according to negotiations going on between Russia and Ukraine, there's a sense that the timeline we may be looking at is a withdrawal of Russian troops within 1 to 2 weeks, and a potential full-fledged peace deal between Russia and Ukraine at the very latest by sometime in the beginning of May. I have no way to assess whether or not that's a reasonable timeline, if it's too fast, too slow, whatever. That's just what somebody involved in the negotiations is saying, and apparently both sides are much more reactive than they have been in the past couple of weeks since this conflict broke out. And funny little aside here in France, everybody, we're in the middle of a presidential election here right now, that whose first round is at the end of May, and then a couple of weeks later is the final round. In France, there's 2 rounds of voting for the president. There's a million candidates in the first round, so all but 2 get eliminated after the first round, and then you have another 2 weeks before the second round, and there's usually debates between those 2 candidates and all the other voters from all the other candidates in the first round have to find a place in the second round to line up behind one of the 2 remaining candidates. So there's debates happening, and Emmanuel Macron, who is the president of France at the end of his 5-year term, is seeking another 5-year term right now, and he's up against mainly hard right competition. Marine Le Pen, Éric Zemmour, former journalist, and yeah, the competition for Macron is on the hard right. So, but what's funny is Macron is known for wearing really nice, snappy suits, right? Hanging out in the Élysée Palace with all the ornate gold-toned decor and looking really sharp, right? And now he's kind of gone shabby chic, a la Vladimir Zelensky in the war zone bunker. He was wearing you can Google it. I don't have a picture right in front of me. I'm going to have to find a way to be able to show you guys things, I think, in the next week or so, because it'd be fun. We can talk about things that I saw online. We can comment on videos. I'd love to be able to throw a video up and go through and comment, like a White House press conference or something like that. But he's been wearing like paratrooper military hoodie, like something, it looks like something he got from a military surplus store. And he's like got a unshaven look and looks kind of scruffy, and it looks like he messed up his hair, and man, it looks like he was dragged out of a bomb shelter or something. And there's everybody's laughing. They're saying it's the Vladimir Zelensky trend. You can be the leader of a country and also look like you are living in mom's basement, I guess, or somebody's basement. Maybe Macron thinks he's fighting a war. I think he probably does. Probably feels like he's fighting a war. That's kind of the posture he's been taking. But now he thinks, well, I didn't know that I could not look like a general and still have people believe that I'm fighting a war. Didn't know I could wear like a paratrooper's hoodie and still look the part. Well, everybody's laughing. So I don't know if that's working for him or not. But anyway, that's the funny anecdote for the end of the show. I'd like to try to kind of leave it on an absurd note, because we do live in absurd times. And although there's a lot of serious issues at play here, I don't know, you gotta sometimes have a bit of a chuckle about some of it, right? A little bit of dark humor. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find us on rachelmarsden.com. At the top of the page, there is a Linktree link. And if you click on that, you can find all of the replays of this show. We're on all the platforms: YouTube, Facebook Live, Twitch, under The Real Rachel Marsden, Rumble, Odyssey, the Free Speech Champions, #1 position, Odyssey. Big defenders of free speech. We'd like to thank them for that. YouTube. So join us on any one of those platforms anytime. And we'll be back on Thursday with former CIA station chief to talk about Ukraine. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel Marsden, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. See you next time.